Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending where you are joining us. Welcome. This is our first topic of the fall webinar series that we are offering to you in collaboration with the Association of Asia Pacific Business Schools. And I'm really happy that you have been able to join us in this workshop. I see people keep logging in. So I want to make sure that everyone is able to log in. But today's webinar is brought to you by Peregrine Global Services and our partner, Association of Asia Pacific Business Schools, AAPBS. Peregrine works in cooperation with AAPBS to help provide the business schools with resources and services to enhance quality assurance and business education for our partner institutions located in the Asia Pacific office. My name is Alima Jamiasuren, and I'm running this webinar today out of my office in Tokyo, Japan. I'm Director of Asia Pacific Operations of Peregrine Global, and Peregrine Global is an organization committed to developing values-based leaders and impacting the quality of education around the world. We offer higher education solutions related to learning assessment and online learning. We also offer higher education consulting solutions along with leadership and professional development workshops and seminars delivered to you in person, online, or hybrid. Kayla is my esteemed colleague from the AAPBS, and typically she has introduction about her organization and her role in the organization, but today she had her second shot and having a bit of a reaction. So sending Kayla healing vibes. And please, I saw many of you are members of AAPBS. And if you are not a member, this is an amazing and wonderful organization that is member-based and has some incredible networking opportunities and events they organize. So aapbs.org is a way to go and visit AAPBS. So there are multiple ways for you to participate in today's workshop. And I know it's a 2-hour workshop, so I will probably leave a good chunk of time at the end to make sure that we have a Q&A session and get to all the answers you might have. And we'll play it by the hour, see if we need a break in between, which I'd be happy to provide. So as I said, this is a participatory kind of workshop, so feel free to raise your hand or send your question in the chat box. I'm going to check the chat box as I'm going through the content. And then if you have a question that needs to be asked immediately, feel free again to raise your hand, ask your question, or type it into the comment section or the question pane. And I will have a number of poll questions, so feel free to give your feedback and respond to those. So as you've probably seen in the announcement for the workshop, we do have a gift for you as a token of appreciation of spending this time with us. And I will explain what that is in a few minutes. All right. So I just want to make sure that we are good. I still see people signing in, and wonderful. So, so I'd like to begin with a little bit of inspiration, right? And let's start our discussion with one of my favorite quotes from Nelson Mandela. Now, Mandela understood that changing the world in a positive way could be achieved through education. But more importantly, education that develops and encourages the use of critical thinking at its cornerstone, because that'll help the world to minimize the risk of falling into ignorance. So we are all educators, and I have worked as currently now global higher education consultant. I've also taught courses. Currently, I'm teaching a leadership course to MBA students. So we all appreciate and believe that as educators, we play a crucial role in improving the world we live in, right? And we do that by continually reflecting on and improving the quality of education we offer to our students, improving the educational experiences for our learners, who will, at the end, bring on positive changes in the world we live in. So when we look at the title of this workshop, right, it really is about looking at what we are doing at our institutions to improve quality, and quality through the notion of learning outcomes. How we can use learning outcomes as a tool to improve quality. So when we talk about assurance of learning, we are referring to how to demonstrate through assessment processes that students achieve learning expectations for the programs in which they participate. Now, development, measurement, and analysis of learning outcomes is integral into providing quality business programs at all of our institutions. So I'm not going to play this video. It's a really cute video, but let's move on to our next slide, which is why are learning outcomes important in higher education? So we have made a promise to our students that when they complete our business programs, they will have acquired certain knowledge, competencies, and skills which they can apply to their work environments. Then how do we know we are delivering on those promises to our students, right? And how do we ensure that we continue delivering on those promises? So the answer is by setting effective and measurable learning objectives and also measuring them, right? Learning outcomes are important because they help us to measure what we expect students to know and be able to do once they have completed their studies. Also, they help to ensure that a process of continuous improvement is in place, right? Not just like a once in a while kind of event that has to be done to satisfy in order to meet your accreditor's requirements and standards. So for all of our stakeholders, right, including students, our partner organizations, the businesses, the organizations that provide employment to our learners, it is strategic and vital that schools remain transparent and accountable. Now, finally, learning outcomes, if done well, enable schools to close the loop, right? I mean, it's a cliche phrase that we use not only in the business and industry, but also in higher education. But, it is quite useful concept. And, I try not to use these idiomatic phrases, but this one really keeps showing up when we talk about accreditation learning outcomes, and rightly so. So simply put, it means that after a process of evaluation and analysis, changes are made to academic programs to help improve any areas that are not meeting your stated learning outcomes. From there, the process begins again, and you are able to determine if the changes that were made made any difference in the new results, right? So hence, traveling through a process from beginning to the end, and then continuing with it, you close the loop. So measuring student learning objectives is not the end goal. Most importantly, we are constantly surveying, collecting data, and analyzing the student learning results, student learning performances to ensure that we are continually improving our academic programs, right? So that's the end goal, to be able to use the data and the results for your academic decision-making purposes. So there's a great nexus between quality and accreditation. So in addition, of course, learning outcomes, goals, or objectives, intended learning outcomes, programmatic learning outcomes, student learning outcomes, you name them, and there are different ways to refer the exact same thing. So these are required by all major international accreditors, right? Including the ones that are listed here. Now, Peregrine works with all the major international accrediting associations and agencies for institutional and programmatic accreditation. So almost all of the accreditors, as mentioned above in this slide, require you to have identified and defined your learning objectives within the established framework of quality assurance processes involving direct measurement and or, depending on the accreditor, indirect measures of learning resulting in programmatic evaluation. So as you can see, we work closely with all the business programmatic international accreditors, IACB, AMBA, ACBSP, AACSP, Equity FMD, but also US, what used to be called regional institutional accreditors. Now they have become national, if you have followed the news lately. And they also, some of them are international by nature. So then let's take a look at what AACSP has to say about learning outcomes, which is also part of the accreditation process for all of the other accreditors. So for example, in the updated 2020 standards, standard 5 is actually devoted to the assurance of learning. So if you look at 5.1, there it states very clearly that the schools use well-documented assurance of learning processes that include direct and indirect measures for ensuring the quality of all degree programs that are deemed in scope for accreditation purposes. So, here AACSB is specifically talking about direct and indirect measures, right? Again, coming back to the point that I've made in the previous slide, that the results of the school's AOL work, in a sense, must lead to curricular and process improvements. So we're talking about assessment, but most importantly, talking about using the results and data for improving academic programs and curriculum. And I know a number of you are going through AACSB accreditation, so we work very closely and we are very, in touch and in tune with their standards and also the solutions we offer. We offer it to you so that they actually help you to get, successfully accredited by AACSB. So some of you are going through ACBSP accreditation. And then, so this accreditor has an entire standard, again, devoted to student learning assessment and asks schools to create a report using direct measures of student learning and comparative measures. So with the comparative measures, they ask schools to have internal and external measures of learning objectives. So the external comparative measure may include performance on external assessments, right? So specifically, Standard 4 states that the business unit must have a systematic student learning outcomes assessment process and plan that leads to continuous improvement. Again, you know that, and I know many of you are involved and deeply involved with accreditation quality assurance, so that's not new information for you. And then there's IACB, another partner of ours, and they have a very well-defined key learning outcomes for its member institutions or for its candidate and schools that are going through reaffirmation process. And then in terms of their key learning outcomes, they include critical thinking, teamwork, communication, and leadership, in addition to core business knowledge areas. So here's one for AMBA. If you're working with AMBA or have worked with AMBA, that also requires learning outcomes to include both fundamental business knowledge areas and also workplace readiness, what we call soft skills as well. So here's my first poll question that I would like to offer to you. And if you could answer, actually, I think you can pick multiple answers. That's the way I set it up. So I want to learn if your institution has a continuous improvement process implemented in your program. So, and this is actually the second session of the Assurance of Learning workshop we're conducting this fall. And during the first session, there was a quite interesting breakout of the responses. So the responses are, yes, you do have a continuous improvement process in place, the formal process, and it's wonderful. A number of you have sort of parts of it, right? And you could improve it. And I hope that's your goal today, to get some ideas and see how you could improve your continuous improvement processes and accreditation processes at your institution. And then some of you might be in the process of creating accreditation and assessment frameworks, right? And then as I see, there are some of you who are have not established a formal process yet. You, I'm sure, have some ways to assess and measure student learning, but you don't have that, system in place yet. So I'm hoping to get more responses from you to get at least all right. So, well, let me share for the sake of, so I have a quite interesting breakout. Again, because I allowed multiple answers, so it's not going to add up to 100%. It's going to be a little more. But here are the results. So I'm happy to see that good 67% of you do have a formal process in place. Wonderful. And about a third of you, again, I said you can pick multiple responses, and then maybe you feel like you have a formal process, but it could need some improvement. So I see that's why there's another third of you. I'm glad to hear a third of you also in the process of creating a new process, and then another 17% said that you don't have a formal process in place yet. So then you have come to the right place, and I'm very thankful of your response to this poll question. Thank you. So I'm going to close this one. So then we have talked about how assessment of student learning is fundamental to the assurance of learning process, and most often is part of the quality assurance and accreditation requirements. So the question then remains, how can we meet these requirements, right? To measure retained learning, ensure continuous improvement, provide transparency and accountability, and close the loop. How do we achieve that? So there are many approaches to establishing a process, and many of you are probably familiar with Mr. Edwards Deming and the PDCA, which is a great place to start, right? You can see the circle or loop here. And I'm sure you are familiar that this tool has been used by many in the business and industry in one form or another. And it has been used for decades to help improve quality. So what we did is, let me go back. We took the Deming's cycle for continuous quality improvement, right? And adopted it into higher education. And it fits very nicely into our framework, right? So what we have come up is learning outcomes continuous improvement process. And in this case, we're calling it learning outcomes assessment process. So it provides a very nice systematic way to review the importance making the most out of learning outcomes assessment data, right, for better decision making. And so we have sort of separated it into different stages. And most importantly, the part we want to focus is the act part, right? The part where we make the changes. And that's the part that's tied to closing the loop. So kind of to go over it, of course, the first step would be to identify and to formulate your student learning outcomes, right? As part of the planning process. And then once you have created your learning outcomes, you want to identify objectives that are tied to each learning outcome. And then after that, you want to identify and specify which assessment tools are used to measure every individual learning outcome. So that's sort of first three steps that fall under plan. And the next one is the implementation phase, right? Where you actually implement the assessment processes in life, and then you collect and analyze the data. And then we have a separate stage, we call it study, because it's all good and dandy to conduct the assessment and of course to get the data and results. But if you don't spend time to really understand why you see what you see, right? If you really don't spend time to identify the areas of strengths, which is always important to know, but also areas of opportunities. And then if you don't share the results and then discuss it with the relevant stakeholders, with the academic improvement committees or with faculty, with the department chairs, or depending on your structure, and if you don't study, you're not going to be able to get to the next stage, which is making changes. So we'll be talking about each of the different cycles and then how we can be successful and effective. So of course, one of the most important parts of this cycle is I briefly mentioned, to establish clear learning outcomes and then at the program level. And then, so this is not to be confused with learning outcomes on the module level or the course level, right? So we're looking to evaluate your entire program. So we are looking at a higher level program level learning outcomes. So we need to determine what it is we want our students to know and be able to do upon completion of an academic program. One of the tools that is often employed when writing learning outcomes is called the Bloom's Taxonomy of Learning, which provides us a list of action verbs based on each level of understanding and learning. And being educators yourself, of course, I'm sure you're quite familiar with the Bloom's Taxonomy. And then the list assists us in creating learning objectives that are descriptive, level appropriate, but most importantly, provides measurable and effective objectives, right? So often when I look at learning outcomes, they're sometimes written in a vague way that makes it very hard to measure, right? We cannot simply say students will understand marketing. Now, what does that mean to understand specifically, right? It is not quite appropriate to use the word understanding in creating learning objectives because it's just too vague. However, we can measure if students are able to summarize, to infer, to compare, or to interpret. So the skills go into higher order from the lowest to the highest. And then the left-hand side list, it could be okay for a general description for something that does not need to be measured, but it is really the right-hand side list that we want to actively employ. And with the help of these action verbs, you can create effective, simple, and measurable learning outcomes. So, and I know you, I'm sure, live it and, study it and, practice it. But I did want to add that in identifying and defining your learning outcomes, make sure you always start from the mission and vision of your institution, right? Entire university. Also go and check out, what the college and school level mission, goals, objectives, and outcomes are. And then you really look closer at your program level learning objectives. Make sure that all of your learning outcomes link back to your programmatic strategic learning goals. And the program goals are usually linked to the university, institution-wide goals, mission, and vision. So learning outcomes are written based on the programmatic goals. So here I wanted to share with you an example of a learning outcomes by degree levels. So as we move up to the degree level, we are moving up to the higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy. We are using higher levels of competencies as we move up from the bachelor's to the master's and also to the doctoral degree in this case. So for example, so this school has 8 learning objectives, right? And if we look at number 4, which is the core business knowledge learning outcomes, at the bachelor's level, it reads, apply major concepts within the traditional areas of business, right? All right, good enough. If we move to the master's level program, now we're getting to demonstrate knowledge of business concepts and functions in an integrated manner. So that's quite a, higher level of thinking we are asking. And then once we move to the doctoral level, that learning objective becomes demonstrate advanced knowledge and competencies in a major field of study in business. We can also look at another example, right? Let's look at critical thinking. So that's the first learning objective. And then, so you see the same pattern, right? With the bachelor's, we're starting with demonstrate an ability to obtain and process information in order to make decisions and solve problems. At a master's level, we are moving into integrating theory and practice and the process of complex problem solving. Now, at the doctoral level, we are going to, the next level of being able to integrate divergent or contradictory perspectives or ideas fully. So some of you might have, bachelor's programs only. Wonderful. And you might have both bachelor's and master's, or you might have all three. So I hope this demonstrates a good way to make sure that you have that, Bloom's taxonomy higher levels appropriate for each academic degree level identified with your learning objectives. So now the next stage is how to identify your objectives or benchmarks, right? And how you will put into place the assessments. Now, these usually go together since the tools you use to assess will often dictate the objectives, benchmarks you will choose. So now, having successfully created your learning outcomes, you need to define your objectives for each of the learning outcomes. So here's an example of the document, and we call it the MBA. In this case, it's the MBA program we're looking at. It's a learning outcomes plan that incorporates the objectives. So let's go back to the business core, right? Number 4, a learning objective, where it states demonstrate knowledge of business concepts and functions in an integrated manner. So an objective that goes with this learning outcome, student learning outcome, is so it could be something like 80% of graduates will receive a score of 70% or higher on each of the 10 core business competencies on the end of program comprehensive assessment exam. So that's one example. Or if we come back to the critical thinking learning outcome of this MBA program, then, let's just kind of reiterate that the learning outcome states integrate theory and practice in the process of complex problem solving. Then the objective could be 80% of graduates will receive a score of 3.5 or better on a 360-degree evaluation of their critical thinking skills. So you get the idea, right? So based on this example of a learning outcomes plan for an MBA program with these 6 different areas, I want to evaluate and have come up with a written statement and measurable objective for each of the learning outcomes. And even, the next step would be we're going to look at which of the assessment tools to use for measuring these learning outcomes along with the objectives. So there are many different tools, of course, that are used to measure learning outcomes, right? So the two that were just listed here was the 360-degree evaluation and then end of program comprehensive assessment. So this actually MBA program is going through AAPBS accreditation. So in this example, both soft skills and critical thinking, in this example, and core business learning outcomes are incorporated. And then also, we can really work and look at setting the objective that matches the learning outcome. But again, we want to keep in mind how can we measure it directly and indirectly. Because remember, AAPBS has indirect as well as direct measure of student learning and performance as one of its requirements. So now we have created these learning outcomes and the corresponding objectives. And then, as we just discussed, a couple seconds ago, we need to come up with the ways to measure it. So what we know is that assessment tools used to measure learning outcomes need to be, as best as possible, of course, objective, comprehensive, and to have results that can be measured, we talked about, right? But the challenge for the schools is to identify efficient. How do you identify, right? Efficient, economic, and effective processes to conduct these assessments. So coming back to our Deming cycle for continuous improvement of student learning, we have identified our objectives and considered a process. And let's move to the next stage of the cycle, which is the collection and analysis stage. And here I would like to offer another poll question. And here I wanted to find out if you, at your institution, at your program, objectively measure your learning outcomes. The first response is yes, we are able to do that, which would be wonderful. And then the second response would be, yeah, we do it, but there's room for improvement. We could, we do measure most of our learning outcomes, but there are some that could be, back in the process for measuring it more objectively. And then the third response is, we currently do not have any objective measures of learning outcomes. So I see you are responding. Thank you. And so far, that's really good news. I see sort of 60, 40, the number's changing a little bit, 63, 38, in terms of, yes, you are measuring your learning outcomes. You got the objective measurements, wonderful. And then the 40% is where, yeah, kind of we're doing it, but there's some room for improvement. And the good news is there's zero response in terms of, no, we don't have any ways of measuring or objectively measuring a learning outcome. So that's really good news. So I would like I'd like to get a good percentage of you respond, but 72% participated. Okay, well, 80% is what I would like to get, but this is wonderful. Thank you again. Let me share the results with you. So the numbers moved to 63% versus 38%, and then 0 takers for the last response, which is wonderful. Good job. That's the whole point of the continuous improvement process, right? You have your processes in place, your frameworks in place, but there's always room for improvement. Or most importantly, you can actually streamline, add some efficiency and so forth, which we can talk about it very shortly. So I have presented to you some examples, right, of student learning outcomes and objectives, and also an assessment plan that includes different ways to measure the learning outcomes along with objectives. So here's, there are multiple tools, of course, assessment tools out there that I'm sure you already utilize to objectively measure your learning outcomes. So here's a list that is, of most common tools out there. There's end of program comprehensive assessment, 360-degree competency evaluation that I've mentioned in the previous example. You also use senior thesis or dissertation as part of your end of program evaluation. You might have embedded assessments in your courses and modules that provide you with program level evaluations. And many of you have, especially our business programs, are really good with offering internships to our learners, right? There are some apprenticeship opportunities and you get some feedback and report that could be sometimes direct measure, but most often indirect measure of learning and performance by your students. And then there are some business simulations that are more and more prevalent out there. So I kind of wanted to go over different types of assessment, right? And typically, when we all do it and we all know it quite well, that there's formative versus summative assessment, right? And we all do formative pretty well. which is the course level assessments that are integral part of the learning process, right? The formative assessment results are used to evaluate and also improve learning. We can enhance student intrinsic motivation, their desire to learn. So which at the end, of course, contribute to improvements in our teaching. Now, program level assessments or summative assessments, they occur at the end of the student's learning process, right? It's used for accountability of the academic program to improve learning. And it's often done on a pre and post sort of program construct to demonstrate the value added, right, to the student's knowledge base as a result of having completed their degree with our institution, with our business program, for example. So these provide summative measures for integrated knowledge or retained student knowledge. So program level direct measures are used to measure students' retained knowledge and skills that students are expected to have acquired at the end of their program of study, right? The program level learning outcomes are written to capture expected results of student retained knowledge. And you can do the direct measure of learning utilizing a comprehensive assessment tool that could be either an embedded assessment or a standalone exam. And direct measurement results are generally used to support, of course, your continuous improvement processes at the institution and the program. Now, indirect measures provide a view of student learning, right? So for example, attitudes, perceptions, feelings, values, etc. They imply student learning by employing self-reported data and reports. Indirect measures help to substantiate instances of student learning. Indirect measures could include surveys, interviews, course evaluations, and reports on retention, graduation, and placement, and etc., right? So these measures are commonly used in conjunction with direct measures of student learning. And especially when I work with schools and business programs that are fairly new to quality assurance processes or to international accreditation requirements, I get asked quite a bit. And I guess I get asked less, but I remember, 10 years ago, 9 years ago, when I was working with the good group of good number of schools that were going through this international accreditation, there was always a question, why final grades could not be used for program level evaluations, right? So final grades and course grades could not be used for summative assessment of student learning. Why? So why? Here's an example of a marketing course, right? And I have two students, student 1 and student 2, and they both got a final grade of 81, which looks pretty good, right? However, in the blue circle, we have provided the breakout of what the final grade incorporates, right? What does it include? It includes things like class participation. And there's a group presentation, could be a final presentation, right? So if a final presentation was used for the final grade, then it's going to take into account certain aspects such as form, right? Presentation style and delivery. All of these are not related to the actual learning of the student, right? So for measuring students' retained knowledge and learning outcomes, as you can see, the final grade does not help you to comply with these requirements. And if you have any questions, I'm still monitoring the chat box. So far, I haven't had any questions come through, but do let me know if you have any questions. Or as I mentioned again, you can ask your questions at the end during the Q&A session. So here's a table that tells you course level assessment and the program level assessments doing quite different things, right? So for example, in terms of levels of analysis in a course or in a module, depending how you call it. It's offered in an individual class. Whereas with the program level assessment, all courses in a program or curriculum or in a department or in a business school participate in that assessment. As far as sample is concerned, 100% students enrolled in, as I said, I'm teaching a leadership course that will be offered my course level assessment. Whereas for the program level, depending on your program and on your student population, you might have anywhere from 20 to 25% of your students participate in the program level assessment, right? Especially at the end of the term comprehensive exam, if that's what you have. Now, in terms of measures, I am using for my course level evaluation indirect measures, right, such as assignment or final grades in my course. Whereas for the programmatic evaluation, you are really relying on direct measures of learning, performance, and utilizing rubrics and so forth. I am the assessor, I am the instructor in that course, so I am evaluating all my students. Whereas with the program level evaluation, right, there is no one, essentially there's, anyone who's not a student is able to conduct. And if you are using online automated, embedded assessment tools, then you might have a program coordinator, right? Or an administrator who is responsible for your assessment. So in terms of faculty input, I'm the person who's determining the content and what are my performance standards that I set for the course and for the learners. Whereas at the program level, you have your curriculum committee or your quality assurance committee, or depending on how your program is set up, you have a group of program faculty members perhaps determining content and determining also what are the standards for performance and learning. And as we've discussed, you set up the learning outcomes and objectives and so forth. So in terms of the results, I'm the course instructor who's reviewing my students' results, whereas with the program level evaluation, you have faculty, you have various committees, you have employers, you're sharing the program level assessment results with the various stakeholders in order to recruit students for your marketing purposes, or if you have employers who hire your graduates, you might be communicating that to them and so forth. So much wider scope. And then how do you use the results for your continuous improvement processes and making changes? As a course instructor, of course, I'm making changes to improve my individual course content, and then for the students that are enrolled in my class, right? Whereas for a program level, you are going to look at a whole host of ranges of changes you are going to implement that could be tied to curriculum content, right? That could be tied to delivery of the content or so forth. So the goal of being to help improve the student learning and performance in the entire program. So I know this is, I went into more detail than I expected, but I kind of think that's a good illustration. Now, this brings us to the last two steps of the cycle, which is sharing the results and making changes, or better known as closing the loop. Our objective here is to take all of the work we have put into this process and use it to uncover our strengths and weaknesses and decide if we want to address them, and if so, how, right? And I always like to say that in order to start making changes, make sure you have good sample, of course, make sure you have a trend that's established, and make sure you have, especially when you identify the areas of strengths and opportunities, the areas of improvement, that is a focus of your program, that is a priority of your program. If certain results are not to the level you want to see, but it's sort of a cursory kind of area of your program's focus, then maybe it's not as big of a deal, versus if you're a program that says you have an accounting focus, right? And you're known to graduate students with strong accounting background, and somehow your students when you see the performance evaluations at a program level, and then especially if you benchmark your students' results against different averages, perhaps of all schools outside of the US, or all schools in the US, or all schools, average of the European business programs, or Asian or Southeast Asian, then you really want to take a closer look, study it more, and then start planning what changes you want to implement. So as you recall, the objective is to have data that enables the accreditation and the quality assurance team that it serves to help understand to what degree your students are meeting your learning outcomes. So here's a sample, simple bar graph that gives a benchmark with the 5 topics that are under evaluation. So this is actually taken from our business comprehensive assessment report. And then if you can see is the topic would be business ethics. And we changed the, of course, name of the institution and put Peregrine in there. But then what you see is you are comparing the business economics, entrepreneurship, human resource management, information systems, and logistics management to the average of the all outbound exams offered to, in this case, is probably all schools outside of the US. So you can see where your students performing relative to that particular benchmark. So after reviewing the results, it is best to determine if you should make changes, right? And here's a quick table that gives some examples of what possible changes might take place after having discussed and studied the results. And I'm sure you guys do it in your institutions. You put a nice action plan together. This is a simple example where after, again, having reviewed your results, for example, the first item is the action to take place is or to improve accounting results. So what is exactly to be done, right? Then review accounting course with Professor Jones to identify enhancements, review with Professor Smith, study workshop exercises in accounting, and then there's a timeline attached to that task. And then what are the desired outcomes you want to see from this particular change? You want to improve score to surpass 60% within 2 years of implementing this change. So in this example, you have your what kind of change to implement, what is the timeline, and what is the desired outcome. And then I would also add, and here we have the, people who are parties who are responsible for this action. So this provides you hopefully a nice framework to conduct this activity. So as I mentioned, as a token of my appreciation, and I would like to offer you a complimentary resource for today's workshop participants. So we have created an Assurance of Learning Workbook. It's a pretty comprehensive, really nice workbook you can use for your accreditation and continuous improvement processes. We actually conduct these workshops in person. And so I will be happy to send you access to the digital copy of this report. And the purpose of this Assurance of Learning workshop is, of course, to teach the concepts, the principles, and requirements associated with the Assurance of Learning to higher education officials seeking initial accreditation or reaffirmation with the international business programmatic accreditors. So we have this course online module, and it's called An Introduction to Assurance of Learning, right? And that's the course that applies to quality assurance managers in higher education and who want to learn more and who need more information about AOL for continuous improvement processes. So I'll be happy to also provide you access to this online learning modules if you would like to, have either yourself or your faculty or your colleagues to go through the course at their own pace. And then, of course, feel free to share the Assurance of Learning Workbook with anyone who could benefit from this resource. All right, so I think we're kind of at the good midway point, and see if anyone has any questions, or does anyone need a break? So if you need a break, feel free to type in "need a break." If not, also let me know. We don't need a break. We can just keep going. Yes. All right. So let's have a 5-minute break, and I'll see you back at 5 before the top of the hour. Thank you. All right, welcome back. I hope you had um, the much needed little walk. And let's see, I hope everyone is back. Okay. So, all right, let me know if you have any questions so far. So far we are pretty much covering our, fundamentals and going over the pretty nice, I like the Deming cycle for continuous improvement and how it's really nicely, could be adapted and the way we have adapted into higher education. So now in this second part of the workshop, I wanted to discuss, so what are the solutions out there, right? What is available out there that could help you, um, to make your assessment process and implementation more effective, efficient, and most importantly, economic, financially viable in terms of not only finances, but also resources, because time is money. And we all know our faculty and ourselves, including, quite thinly stretched and overstretched. So there are two solutions I wanted to discuss today. And we have our next workshop. Next one is going to be 1 hour long, not the 2 hours like today and the last week, but it'll be 1 hour deep dive into each of these two solutions. So today I'll try to provide more of an overview and highlights of these two solutions. And if you wanted to learn more in detail, and if you have, your team members, your colleagues, or faculty members who could benefit from learning more about these solutions, please, I hope and look forward to seeing you in the next webinars. So the soft skills, right? The first one is the soft skills, and these are personal qualities that are important to success in the workplace and also in life. These skills can be taught and developed with the experiential kind of learning, but have always been difficult to assess, right? So, as I said in our next webinar, and please check the AAPBS.org site, because I have quite a few number of webinars coming up, so I will hesitate to give you a wrong date and time. But we will be talking at length about this solution. Oh, it says we'll be talking about on December 2nd and 3rd about value skills. So, but today, let's focus a little more on the business knowledge assessment tool. Again, I'll also have another deep dive with the GBE academic, this programmatic assessment tool. But so far, we have talked about defining learning outcomes and putting together assessment plan and continuous improvement processes in place, right? And we have talked that the most important step in the Deming cycle of continuous improvement is to analyze the data, understand the data, but use the data and the results, most importantly, for improving the quality of your educational programs. So there's no need to spend time, effort, and resources if we do not use the information obtained from the assessment for academic decision making and making improvements to your curriculum, learning, delivery of the content, and knowledge to your learners. So, and this is that solution, right? One of the solutions that we at Peregrine offer, the Global Business Education Assessment Tool. This truly helps you to make the most out of your learning outcomes assessment data for better decision making. And that has been our goal in offering this assessment tool to you. So what is GBE? I mean, it says Global Business Education Assessment. Global in a sense, we have a US-based business education assessment tool, and then the assessment for the schools outside of the US, we call it GBE. So in terms of content, it's core business topical content areas we offer in this tool. So it is, simply put, a customizable online program level assessment solution with the in-depth reporting and data analysis to help you satisfy your assurance of learning requirement. So this particular solution provides normed summative assessment for academic programs and is used for internal and external programmatic evaluation. Now, this customizable solution is easily managed and can be effectively integrated into any business program to evaluate student retained knowledge associated with the program's learning outcomes. The assessment solution is specifically designed to address programmatic accreditation requirements related to learning outcomes assessment, quality assurance, and external academic benchmarking. So you can administer the assessment as an outbound exam at the end of the student's program of study, right? It's a post-test. We call it outbound exam. But you can also use it as a programmatic pre and post-test. So you would offer the inbound exam or the pre-test to your students at the beginning of the program, and then the outbound exam at the end of the program. So if you have a bachelor's program, your freshmen or sophomores or first or second year students, depending how your program is structured, would be taking the inbound exam. And then as the last activity in their senior year, in the bachelor's program, students would be taking the outbound exam. And if you have a master's program, then, as they enter into your program, they take the inbound. As they complete the program, they take the outbound exam. So in order to truly measure learners' business acumen, right, knowledge, we offer the GBE exam in 7 different languages, starting with British English, and then followed by German, Spanish, French, Portuguese, Mongolian, and Russian. So the key here is when we offer this assessment to the students, right, we are not asking them to take English comprehension exam. We really want to measure students' knowledge, right? And then because students are taking these exams in their native language, we are able to provide you with a really great roster of averages for aggregates. So that's why we're able to compare average of all Asian students' results to the average of all European students' results, for example, right? We have Latin American, we have African, we have Southeast Asia average and so forth. So that's really something that's quite unique, and I don't think you'll find it anywhere else. And then with benchmarking, it gives you good sort of idea of where your students are. And it also provides you with great information you can use for recruitment, for marketing, for not only improving the quality of your academic programs, but also communicating how well your students are learning to all your stakeholders. So this is a list of key features that are incorporated into the GBE business assessment tool. You can build either single or multiple assessment exams that are aligned to your learning outcomes by selecting from the existing list of 12 available business and management topics that we have created, right? So we have separate test banks for undergraduate programs and postgraduate programs like master's programs, right? And then we offer you the 12 topics that corresponds to core common, professional topics that a student learns throughout their management education. But you can also, add custom topics, and I can talk about it at length very shortly. You can easily integrate the business assessment tool into your learning management system. That way, your students wouldn't even know they have left their platform, be it Moodle or Canvas. And so provides you with the seamless delivery of the assessment to your students. And then if you integrate it fully to your learning management system, then you will get an automated gradebook posting, which, again, saves time and resources for your faculty. So once you sign up to use our assessment service, you will get a 24/7 unlimited and full administrator access to all your students' results, data, and most importantly, ability to generate all the analytical reports that Peregrine provides. And we have a full team of client engagement managers who are happy to provide you full training, free training on how to use the client admin, which is a very easy to navigate kind of platform. But if you needed that free training, they can provide, or if you needed them to run a report, they can also do it for you. But because we are in Asia, the time difference is quite substantial between us and the US home office. So it would be rather beneficial if you had someone who could, navigate and learn how to use the client admin, and most importantly, run the data in case your AACSB site visit team is, on site visiting, working with you, and then you want to run the longitudinal report or external comparison report or direct measure report. So you can do it right there and then from your account. So with your student performance data, you will be able to conduct internal and external analysis of your program and benchmark scores with other institutions based on the demographical characteristics of the institutions. As I mentioned, we have regional groupings, we have academic groupings, we also have groupings based on the delivery modality. So you can compare your students if you have a bachelor's program to all international bachelor's program average. Or if you have, especially nowadays, you have online programs, you have hybrid programs, or you have traditional program students who come on campus. So depending on that, you can also select your different benchmarking averages. And then when you sign up to use our tool, we have designed it so you don't have to offer this assessment exam to your students and utilize proctoring services, because we have extensive safety and security measures built into the platform. So if you don't have to use a proctor, that saves up anywhere from, depending on who you have contracted, $40 to $50, $100 sometimes in the US. So that helps you to make it more financially viable solution. But most importantly, we have designed this assessment tool so you can offer it to your students, of course, online. And especially in today's transition, it helps you to not put the assessment on the back burner. And if anything, students can, conduct or participate in the assessment at the time, place of their choosing. And then the whole automated feature of it makes it really streamlined and saves time for your programmatic administrators. So here's the list of the 12 business topics. And then when I say business topic, this is an umbrella term of what you might call, overall business content areas, right? Subject areas. So this is the list of the 12 topics that we as Peregrine offer to you to create an assessment exam. So it's pretty typical, accounting, business ethics, finance, strategic management, leadership, macro, micro, global dimensions of business, information management system, legal environment of business, management. It has 3 subtopics: HR management, operations and production management, or organizational behavior. And then there's marketing, quantitative techniques and statistics. And then number 13 is customized topics. So when I said this is comprehensive, customizable, and tool, what is meant is if you have a bachelor's program, look at your curriculum, right? What is the content? If you cover all these 12 common professional business and management topics, wonderful. You include all 12 of these in your assessment exam, right? However, you might be a bit more specialized and you may not cover certain areas. If you don't offer business leadership to your undergraduate students, which quite often happens, then by all means, do not include it. You should not be testing your students on subjects that they have not been taught, right? So, or you have multiple bachelor's programs. Maybe you have one that's focused on accounting and more math heavy. Then you might have 8 topics that have accounting, macro, micro, stats, and then some of the other core fundamental business topics. But then you might have another major, maybe bachelor's in marketing, that may not have as extensive background with accounting and finance. Then don't include it in that. So especially with the master's postgraduate programs, the chances are you're not going to cover all 12 of these topics. So there you're really going to create customized assessment, and then you can create as many exams as you need to. And there's no extra charge for customization and for multiple exams and so forth. And then the last one is the customized topic. And the reason we have customized topic is sometimes programs are really specialized, right? And for example, we work with the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York, and one of their core subjects is fashion merchandising, right? And they're the only school with such a topic from our client institutions. And we have more than 550 partner institutions using our assessment and other online courses and programs. And so they need fashion merchandising. So they have uploaded for fashion merchandising as a customized topic. There's no external benchmarking on that topic because they're the only school with that. But they do need internal analysis. They do need data to see how their students are performing. And so that's the customized topic. For our schools in India, and I see we have some of our representatives from Indian business schools, we have 3 extra topics that are specific to India. So there's Indian accounting, I think Indian finance. Please email me and I'll be happy to send you that information. So as I said, if you have a very specialized program, very unique program, and you want to offer it as part of the bigger comprehensive programmatic evaluation, we're more than happy to upload the questions as your institutional custom topic. So let's see if there are any questions so far. All right. Okay. And what we are most known for is our comprehensive, expansive reporting capability, right? It's not enough, we have been talking, to administer the assessment alone. The most beneficial part of assessment is to use the data and the results to gain insight into how your students are learning, how they're performing relative to your academic curriculum. And you want to be able to identify the areas of strengths and the areas of improvement, and also make decisions using the data and the results on student learning and performance. So once you identify the gaps, right, you can start discussing the way to bridge gaps and remedy the shortcomings. So these actionable results produced by our assessment tool help you satisfy your accreditation requirements, be it national, could be your national accreditation requirements, or international, like our partners, AACSB, and others, to address your assurance of learning needs and help you improve the quality of your higher education programs. So we have grouped our reports into 3 categories. The first is reports based on individual student results. The second is used for your programmatic evaluation purposes. And then third, we call it supplemental reports. So here, I wanted to ask you my next poll question. Oh, have I not been? Okay. So there, I wanted to find out, to what degree are you able to close the loop using your learning outcomes data? And in our previous poll, I learned that at least good 60% of you have a process in place to objectively measure your learning outcomes, right? Which is wonderful. And then another 38 or so percent working to improve on those processes. But here I wanted to learn, are you successfully using the results to close the loop, or partially, we're doing a pretty good job? Versus the third response, no, you don't have a formal process in place to review the results, to discuss the results, have a meeting maybe with faculty or committee, and then really have a comprehensive sort of curriculum improvement plan. And then the fourth one is no, you don't have anything in place. So as the responses keep coming back, Well, again, I allowed the multiple choices to be selected as a response. So my total doesn't add up to 100. But I wanted to get a good percentage of you be able to respond. So I see the way it's breaking out. Um, thank you for responding. The way it's and I keep I'm not stopping the poll question yet because I keep number of responses going up. So far, let's see if we get a little more. All right. All right, so let me share the results. This is what I see. So good third of you, about third of you say, yeah, you're doing a great job. Congratulations, wonderful. But there's another 57%, nearly 60% of you are, feel you're doing pretty good job. Again, that's wonderful. Good foundation, good base. And then you have a 30% of you saying that you don't have a formal process yet, but I hope you are working towards putting that in place. Wonderful. Thank you for responding to this poll question, which also helps you to take stock of where you are, right? So I hope that was helpful. Okay. So as I mentioned, the first group of reports, it's the individual student result-based reports, right? So it's pretty self-explanatory. The first is you get all your students' results, showing the percent of questions answered correctly for each topic and a subject level. So this is going to be pretty nice detailed data. So this is, something that you can use, of course, to link it to maybe your demographic data, and you are more than free to conduct any further analysis using this data. So your data, you should own it, again, without any without any extra charges. It comes as part of the service. The next is if you wanted to, once you have implemented the GBE assessment, right? You have your inbound exam offered to your students. You have your outbound exams offered to your students. So if I am a freshman this year, this fall, started with your program, and then after 4 years, I graduate and I take the outbound exam, then you will be able to run a pairwise report that includes my results, right? So that's sort of like individual student progress report. And there's great value in data and information, but we're talking about programmatic evaluation. But this is available to you, and you can run the full report. Also, you can run the executive summary version of that report. Now, this is where you want to spend most of your time. Programmatic evaluation reports for your assessment activities. So I'll go over a couple of them in a little more detail, but here's essentially the list, the internal analysis report, the external comparison report, the program cohort comparison report, and then longitudinal report, which will be your trend analysis report. So this is the list of the supplemental reports, and there's a response distractor report. I think I'll save it for the last because this is the activity that you would want to do after having reviewed all of the previous reports. There's a free student survey report, and we have talked about how, for example, with AACSB, you need direct as well as indirect measure of learning, right? So on a comprehensive assessment tool that we're talking about, you are gathering direct measure of learning, right? We ask the student thinks, uses critical abilities and calculates or goes through a process and selects the correct answer, which is a reflection of their knowledge, right? Their critical thinking and so forth. But if you include an exit survey along with the outbound exam, and then in that exit survey include questions that ask for indirect measure of learning, right? How do you feel about this topic? Do you feel you have, learned it, or you have, how would you rate yourself in this area, in that area, and so forth? Then you can get a summary report for this exit survey which could be administered in conjunction with an outbound exam. We do recommend not to put more than 5 to 8 questions on the student exit survey because it's offered before the outbound exam. So if you have an outbound exam of 12 topics, we're looking at a 120 question assessment, pretty comprehensive. So you want to make sure that they stay the sharpest through the programmatic evaluation test. So this is a sort of free report, complimentary, and then you can get a summary of the results. It's actually quite flexible in a sense. You can have questions of all different types. You can have a Likert scale question, Likert type of scale type of question. You can have a multiple choice question. You can have open-ended question. You can have true or false. So if, with the open-ended questions, if students provided feedback, we'll just include the summary of those writings in the student survey report. Now, grade scale report. We don't have that problem in Asia, thank God. Our students like to take Peregrine's comprehensive external assessment of student learning. They want to kind of test themselves, see themselves, what they have learned and how, what they have learned measures up to the averages of other indicators, right? So a lot of the times, our business schools in Asia, they offer the assessment exam just as a standalone. Sometimes they offer it as an embedded exam as part of a final course. But then students, again, they put their best effort, they try their best, and then they do pretty well. But I do want to mention with accreditation, there's no such thing as good score or bad score, right? There's no such thing as bad performance or good performance. With the quality assurance or with continuous improvement processes, it's more important to get good data. And then based on that good data, like quality sample, and true sort of reflection of student learning kind of data. And then you want to really, more important part is understand your data, identify where you can improve your results, how you can improve results, right? So in the US, students more easily able to blow exams off. So what happens is if it's a 120 question assessment exam, some schools receive data where students spend 5 minutes answering the questions. So they would just go see, boom, done, right? And then unless an exam is graded or part of a grade, our American students don't tend to take these exams seriously. So in that case, we recommend schools to grade the Peregrine assessment exam and use the grade as part of the final grade. But then in the grade, don't be too strict because it's sort of unfair because you are supposed to deliver students this knowledge, right? You're supposed to train your students and have them, acquire these skills and competencies. So if you failed in your mission and if your students do not perform well, you should not penalize them by giving them low score. So most often, American schools, they would give like 10 points or full credit for just completion of the exam. If that's not doing the job, then they sort of make scaling to make a difference in the final grade and so forth. But it's most often used for US schools, and then there's a grade scale report that schools can utilize in order to motivate students, essentially, right? To help them to perform better. Not to blow it off completely is the more point. All right, so aggregate extraction report, it's a report that provides statistical data for each of the different aggregate averages we have for external comparison purposes. And then if you wanted to see the list of schools that make up each of the different aggregate averages or aggregate pools, as we call it, then you will run the client schools and aggregates report. All right. So, I wanted to hit some of the highlights of the programmatic evaluation reports, as I mentioned. So this one is the internal analysis report, right? You will use this report in order to analyze your program's strengths and weaknesses based on the performance levels of your students. So the internal analysis report is most commonly used for learning outcomes analysis. So school results are compared at the topical level, subject level. So subject levels make up topics. And then you will receive the percent scores and percentile rankings to determine if student performance is below, at, or above desired thresholds established by the school. So within the internal analysis report, you will be able to select one external aggregate to benchmark your students' results, but you can run this report multiple times to make sure that you have the appropriate benchmark. So here's an example, right? Program level learning outcomes are being measured by a comprehensive end of program assessment. And that covers all the fundamental areas of management and business topics. So let's just assume that a representative sample, or all the students maybe, took the test as part of their final course in business strategy. And you can integrate this type of test elsewhere, or have it, as I mentioned, offered as a standalone test. So you can see here the results. So if a performance objective, for example, was set at 60%, then you can see that it wasn't achieved by your learners, for example, in accounting, and perhaps, let's see, and perhaps, economics. So this particular table provides you the inbound exam, outbound exam. So you want to see there's, of course, percentage improvement between the two results. That's the value added of your program to your students' knowledge base. And then I do recommend to conduct both inbound and outbound, right? If you are really cash strapped, or if you're going through some financial difficulties, by all means, outbound. You want to see how your students are performing at the end of the program to get that insight. But for example, your students are performing here at 70%, right? It's a one story if they were coming in at, say, 50%. But it's a whole another story if your students started at 30%. So the value added of your program, is much more significant in that case. And that could be part of your story, right? Part of your institution's quality, or the student demographic that you attract, but also how much more value do you add to your student population. So in this example, as I mentioned, the topics are broken down into its subtopics for further analysis. So you will get that really granular level, meaningful and actionable data. Actually, I did not mention the program and cohort comparison report, and I will shortly. But the idea here is, so this is so for example, to finish my thought, if you have an accounting, right? Accounting will have 4 to 6, and each of the topics will have 4 to 6 subject areas that the results will be broken down and reported, right? So you'll be able to really see, I'm just going to make up income balance sheet, right? So your students could be performing really well in balance sheets, or P&L, or it's been a while since I've taken accounting, but you'll be able to see where, which areas they did well and which areas they did not do well, and what are the components of that total average for the topic, right? So maybe certain courses covered certain areas, and another area of the accounting were covered by a different instructor or different course. And then you'll be able to see, which ones were more effective and which ones were less effective. So you get a lot of good detailed analysis and reports. So what are we looking here? So this is a total for the longitudinal comparison. Oh, so the longitudinal report, right? This is your trend analysis. And you decide what the period is. So you can look at your students' outbound results, for example, every year. If you graduate students twice a year, you can look at each graduating cohort. And you can also combine data, right? Once you have been using this tool for many years, you can look at 3-year averages and so forth. So there's that flexibility in terms of how you want to look at your trend analysis. But then trend analysis, the longitudinal report, is quite helpful, becomes relevant when you are looking at the closing the loop, right? So you have done all this work and you have made changes. And then in the next assessment cycle, you will be able to see if the changes you have implemented in your program, did they have the intended impact? So that's what, of course, the longitudinal analysis report would be quite helpful. As for the external comparison report, you can select up to 5 different aggregate pools and compare your students' results against the average of those schools' results for external benchmarking. And then you can externally benchmark your school's results and set targets for improving your performance levels. And actually, I remember talking to one of the schools in Asia where a dean took the Peregrine report to the Ministry of Education. And then when they asked, okay, you're saying your school is good quality, you're saying you want this funding or you want to improve, increase the number of students accepted into your program. So how do I know if that's the true, right? And then the dean of that business school was able to pull out Peregrine external analysis report and show some of the results where the average of his business school students were on par or performing at a higher level than all international schools average, it was a Southeast Asian schools average. And that particular Southeast Asian cohort has private and public schools separated, and also all US business programs. So that was kind of helpful in sharing the story and showing this data as another proof of students having achieved competencies and the program really delivering on their promises to the students. All right, so this is, oh yeah, good. So this is a program comparison or student cohort group comparison report. So if you have multiple campuses, if you have multiple types of student cohort groups, for example, if you have traditional students who are 18 to 22 years of age, or maybe you accept non-traditional learners, right? Adult learners, then you can compare their results against each other. And in terms of a programmatic comparison report, so let's just assume again, you have a bachelor's program with accounting focus, and you have a bachelor's program with marketing focus, right? So in order to see if your accounting students are performing at a higher level on accounting topics than marketing students on accounting, you want to run this program comparison report and make sure that that is the case, right? So that's the program and student cohort comparison report, which again provides you another look at your student and the learner's data and reports. So we talked about the longitudinal analysis report, your trend analysis report, to really see the trend, identify the changes you have made are in fact producing the intended impact and the results. So as I said, after you have reviewed the internal analysis report, the external comparison, the trend analysis, and after you have really studied and understood, looked at the topics and then subtopic levels, and identified your areas of focus and priority. Also, you have a trend established because you don't want to make changes based on a fluke in the data. And then you have good sample. You have at least, again, depending on the size of your institution, for some institutions, good size would be 10,000 or 1,000 or 500, depending on your student population. Then you want to come to this report we call the response distractor report. Now, using this report, you can identify various knowledge gaps. So you come back to this report, as I mentioned, after having reviewed the internal analysis report, confirm that the trends you observe are factual, and you have compared your performance results against the benchmark aggregates and so forth. And then here, what we did is we wanted to understand why students are answering questions incorrectly, right? What can we learn from the wrong responses? So we took our database, and so we have database of thousands of questions, where questions are drawn randomly and offered to the students. And then each question it's a multiple choice question test. So each question has one correct response, and depending on the question, typically 4 incorrect responses, right? So for each of the responses, we coded it to one of the 5 types of response distractors. So if a student picks a wrong answer, right, so the response distractors would be due to, so student answered the question correctly due to, say, factual based error. What does it say? Yeah, it's a little small, but factual based error, conclusion based error, concept based error, interpretation based error, and also calculation based error. So our test bank questions are coded, right? So in this report, we first take your sample and compare your students' results against the test bank sample. And we want to see, are your students answering questions incorrectly, for example, due to calculation-based error, at a higher frequency than the test bank sample? And is that statistically significant, right? We also have another table where we compare your student's sample to the sample of your aggregate pool, the comparison, external benchmarking pool, right? So again, are your students making errors due to, say, interpretation-based error at a higher frequency than the sample comparative group? And is that statistically significant? So each time there is discrepancy, and that is statistically significant, we highlight that cell for you. Remember, the report is going to be on a topical level, but each topic will be separated into its subtopics. So you're getting a lot of detailed information. So how do you use it, right? So kind of come back to the accounting example. Say your accounting students are making errors due to calculation-based response distractor at a higher frequency than your test bank sample, right? And also due to, also higher than your comparative pool or sample external benchmarking pool. And then, what could the remedy be? Maybe your accounting students need a little refresher, math for accounting students. Maybe you can have a couple review sessions before they start the accounting course and help them to, hone their calculation and, math related skills. So this only helps you to identify the knowledge gaps, but also hints you at the remediation steps. So here's another example. Say you have a strategy course, right? And then your students are making higher than the test bank sample or the comparative pool sample errors due to conclusion-based response distractor. So that kind of hints at your students maybe not using their critical skills or not able to utilize it at a higher level, right? So what do? Maybe you can incorporate some content as to, how do you analyze, how do you draw conclusions, or maybe you can have some assignments and activities that gives them more practice, like group activity, where students get to really, go deep and not only learn the concept and apply it, but also be able to draw some good conclusions or, be able to solve some problems using the knowledge they have attained. So this is kind of really cool report that helps you to really use it for your continuous improvement processes. So I have an economics background, so I get excited about data and reports and analysis. So if you couldn't tell. In any case, so in summary, this global business education assessment tool, we call it GB assessment tool, is able to provide you with a cost-effective and a practical solution to the evaluation of programmatic learning outcomes. And it provides you with actionable data that you can use for your continuous improvement work, right? And using Peregrine's assessment service, your administrators or program managers can map the programmatic learning outcomes to the exam topics and subjects, set targets and objectives, can externally benchmark, integrate student surveys that I've mentioned, evaluate the results, and report progress relative to knowledge-based and critical thinking learning outcomes, in your quality assurance reports, accreditation reports, or your own programmatic continuous improvement efforts. Now, most importantly, you can use the information from the GBE assessment tool for your academic decision making and improving the quality of your program, right? So development, measurement, and analysis of learning outcomes are integral into providing high quality programs at all of our business programs. So I hope our GBE assessment tool with its expansive reports help you make the most out of learning outcomes assessment data for your better decision making. So here I would like to pick your brain and ask you my next poll question. Could you please let me know? We have a whole series of webinars scheduled, right, in partnership with AAPBS. I also have other partners that we offer workshops, seminars for the schools in the region, the Asia Pacific schools, Southeast schools, and then Indian schools and so forth. So please let me know which topics of that I have listed here are of more relevance to you, urgency to you, or really constitute current challenges. So we do have experiential learning, a strategy simulation, and we also have great wealth of information and experience to share about experiential learning. The next is more of the assurance of learning, learning outcomes planning, and putting assessment plan together and so forth, similar to today's workshop. If there is a big need, I would be happy to offer it more again or more often, so forth. We have, as I mentioned, a whole series of workshops and seminars on developing career readiness skills, soft skills, digital skills, and also have a tool how to measure it. And then there's more of the AOL, right? So thank you. I see, again, I allowed multiple choice responses because I really wanted to learn where, your areas of focus are. And at this point, AOL, of course, we are conducting an AOL workshop today. So that's definitely leading the responses, 75% of you want to see more on AOL. And about 50-50, still more on learning outcomes planning. Actually, the second and fourth are, well, the second is more on learning outcomes, and then the last one is more of a wholesome and more overall assessment and measurement of learning. Okay, I'll take that. And then thank you. I see some interest in experiential learning simulations. I can share the results with you. And then soft skills. I mean, soft skills from talking with our partner institutions, helping students to get employed, of course, and be successful at their jobs, and also graduating students who are able to perform straight out of graduating from the schools, and performing is another expectation, another challenge that higher education institutions are tasked to address, right? So I understand that, and thank you for that response. Okay, stop sharing. All right. Then if you have any questions, I do have a little time, so I can go over value skills. And given that 50% of you did show interest in learning more about developing soft skills and digital skills, and I'm kind of putting together assessing soft skills along this line of topics. So then let me touch a little bit on the value skills, unless you want me to open the floor for Q&A. If you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the question pane, or so far, you guys have been amazing. I hope it was very clear and you understood everything, or it was a lot of information you needed to process it more in order to come up with questions, or, there are all sorts of possibilities for you to, of course, take away from this workshop. So, okay, thank you. Then I'll plug away with the value skills. As I mentioned, on December 2nd and 3rd, we'll have a full sort of deep dive into this tool and into, discussing different areas for soft skills and career readiness. But so let's talk about it now that we have a little bit of time. So, so far we have talked about, of course, defining and measuring learning outcomes. And so now I'd like to share then a method for evaluating interpersonal competencies, right? And how Peregrine can mitigate some of the challenges in assessing soft skills. So we do understand the importance of soft skills and the relevance of it in the workplace. But we also all accept that evaluating these program objectives poses us quite a big challenge. There's no widely accepted definition for many of the soft skills we talk about, right? And then each person has their own way of judging them. It is difficult to get a reliable measure of performance on these, what we call soft skills. So yet, if we are including interpersonal skills as program level outcomes, we need some metric to show that students are achieving the targets we set for them, right? So in light of these difficulties, we propose a new instrument to evaluate soft skills proficiency. So we created EvaluSkills. And EvaluSkills, this assessment tool, is modeled after a 360-degree assessment that is used in industry, right? So 360 evaluation gathers a variety of perspectives and feedback on a person's relative strengths and weaknesses from, as I said, a variety of perspectives, right? Those could include supervisors, bosses, peers, or even employees who have worked under a person you are evaluating. And we have created a bank of assessment items. So the assessment items are essentially these individual interpersonal skills, right? And they come with its own evaluation rubric. So you can choose from this test bank, and each skill, so it's pretty comprehensive, comes with its own objective statement regarding performance, so that evaluators have common ground in rating participants. So here are some sample learning outcomes, right? You can use and map it to our EvaluSkills. So most likely you have learning objectives centered on the types of knowledge a graduate will have upon program completion. It's also likely that you have more idealistic learning objectives focused on the conduct and principles of graduates as they go out into the world. So in this list, we see that 5 of the 6 learning outcomes reflect behavior, such as being a leader, respecting diversity, and working effectively in teams, right? So as I mentioned, the goal of EvaluSkills is to provide you with reliable measurement of student performance on learning outcomes related to workplace readiness competencies. So we provide you a menu of skills to choose from to create your own instruments. And if desired, you can also add your own assessment items. I have a feeling you don't need to because we have more than 200 plus skills and corresponding rubrics that make up this bank of assessment skills. And, you know, there's also an opportunity to collect written feedback. So how do you create an instrument? We have pre-made, in a sense, pre-built assessment instruments that are more applicable to AACSB or to ACBSB and other accreditors, or you can create your own customized assessment instrument of soft skills. So you kind of, the analogy would be ordering pizza, right? You can just order, you know, meat lovers, I don't know, or vegetarian pre-made pizza, or you can really, you know, pick and choose ingredients that are more relevant to your particular program's needs, right? So this is an example. So we, as I mentioned, each, so assessment instrument consists of the soft skill, right? In this case, for example, critical thinking and problem solving skill. And then it comes with its own evaluation rubric. that allows you to measure items that typically feel quite intangible, right? And then with each rubric, it comes with a statement and the sample behaviors to reduce evaluation subjectivity. So what does it mean to be level 5, right? Exceptional. And what does it mean to be 4? Excellent. What does it mean to be 3? Competent, or meets this particular competency, marginal, and so forth. What kind of behaviors should be exhibited by the participant in this evaluation in order to rate 5? And then there's also information on scaling. So as you can see, it's a 5-point Likert scale rubric. And with the use of these rubrics, we are really able to take that subjectivity bias out of the evaluation. Now, the platform allows you to create different assessments for different programs. And then you can also track cohort performances over time. So there's an average based on individual self-assessment of the participant, but there's also an average based on evaluators of that particular participant. And also, you are able to provide to also able to get a participant group cohort report. And as I've gone through pretty extensively over the business education assessment exam reporting capabilities, we also offer them in a pretty, substantial way for the value skills assessment service. So there's a participant report, as I mentioned, that compares the participant's score against the average evaluator score and also average of the group score. There's also built-in action plan. And there's the group report. So group report is what is going to use for your programmatic evaluation. And it has average of the self-evaluation, average of the evaluator scores for the group, and then also breakdown of those who performed significantly higher or lower than the group average in each skill. So that's something that you can use for working with individual students, especially if you have a master's level program or doctoral program that you have more of a one-on-one relationship, right? So this is an example of a participant report. And this is an example of an action plan that identifies and highlights the strengths to sustain. Also, it notes the weaknesses to improve upon, right? And there's a section where you can enter what action you're going to take, what tasks you're going to implement in order to improve the results and so forth. So how can you use this value skills tool, right? For the undergraduate students, you can conduct it at the end of the academic program for programmatic assessment, and then sort of provide students with action plan that would be helpful for their workplace, transition. And with the graduate students, with undergraduate students, it's a bit more challenging, especially if they have not had formal internship programs, because for each participant, you want to have anywhere from 2 at least, or 3 to 5 to 6 evaluations in order to get a good average, right? And that is a little more successfully achieved with graduate students. Graduate students might have more relationships with supervisors, maybe they've had internships, or maybe they even have had work experience. So with them, you can conduct a pre and post program level assessment to really measure learning outcomes. And then with the pre-test, you can put an action plan together that learners can use to develop those skills throughout their academic degree program. You can also use value skills with your staff and faculty, and in order to make sure that they are aligned on your mission, vision, and values of the organization. So in conclusion on the value skills, it provides you with flexible, customizable assessment instrument, right? It also offers you standardized rubrics for all assessment items that are pretty hard to measure, like critical thinking, right? Leadership, teamwork, and ability to understand diversity, so forth. So it helps you, these items help you to improve objectivity and consistency of the evaluation. And then again, we have a very easy to use client admin platform, and also a platform that is very easy to manage the whole process from the administration perspective, from the evaluator's perspective, also from the participant's perspective. There are built-in automated emails, reminders, and so forth. So it's pretty nifty in that regard. And then group reports help you to determine the developmental needs for your entire program. And then participant action plan is, helps you for the individual learners to, improve on their weaknesses and on their soft skills. But the most importantly, we're talking about, quality assurance, improving continuous improvement processes at your institution. So this provides you with an ability to use a pre and post test construct with a longitudinal analysis to directly measure change with participants' development. So, I have one last poll question. Thank you so much. You have been really wonderful and responding and being active participants of today's workshop. So I wanted to ask you, how can we help you, right? What do you need from us? I'll be happy, as I mentioned, to provide you with a free copy of our Assurance of Learning Workbook. And if you'd like to get guest access to our Assurance of Learning module, I'd be happy to provide you with that. And if you wanted to schedule a call to have a more of a one-on-one discussion on any issues related to accreditation assessment with you and or with your team members, I'd be delighted to schedule that with us. And if you wanted to stay on our email list to learn more about different solutions we are offering and coming up, I would love to learn that as well. All right. Okay. Answers keep coming up. Okay, thank you. Like when I say, okay, I'm going to end the poll, I keep seeing responses. So I'm going to give you a little more time to make sure that you do get a chance to respond to my final poll question. All right, well, thank you very much. Oh, I will also make the video recording of this workshop available to you. So I'll email you the link once I upload the video. And then with that, what are the questions? So this is my email address. I know I have a beautiful, easy, long last name. So my last name at peregrineglobal.com. If you wanted to check AAPBS, or if you wanted to ask a membership related questions from Kayla, Kayla's email address is secretariat@aapbs@gmail.com. So mine is Jamian Soren. And I know you have participated wonderfully and actively in my, poll questions. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. So I have 1 minute. And well, thank you so much for your time with me. And I see 98% of you stayed with me for the 2 hours. And I look forward to talking with you, to collaborating with you, to working with you. And then look forward to seeing you in our further webinars this fall. Thank you and have a great day, everyone.